And we're going to be starting chapter 11 tonight. This is if I remember right, the fourth sermon, the beginning of the fourth sermon of Jeremiah. There are four sermons that the Lord has given to Jeremiah, and we'll see. We've seen it already in some of the others. I guess all of the others, really. You see the Lord speaking to Jeremiah, and then there'll be a pause, if you will, and Jeremiah will come back with something that and say something either to the Lord himself, or it's just kind of sometimes it's his thought on what the Lord's telling him. Remember, Jeremiah, this is not an easy task for him, because he's having to preach these sermons that the Lord has given him to his countrymen, his people that he loves, his family and friends, and people. Some of these people he's known all his life, and it's a very hard thing that the Lord has given him to preach. It's basically, I think we've all heard of hellfire and brimstone sermons. Well, that's what Jeremiah's having to give them, and that's what the Lord has given him to give to them. And we're going to see tonight where some of the things he tells them the people are not happy about. They threaten to kill him at times because of what he says. We don't necessarily see that, at least not in our country anyway. People threatening. It happens from time to time, but on a whole, as far as when preachers preach the truth, you don't see someone threaten their life. Maybe in other countries you may see it more so than you do here. It does happen. You do. I've heard pastors talk about having that person, whether sometimes a visitor, come in and maybe even sit there for several services, and give them a hard time about what they preach and try to stir up trouble in the church. And you'll see a lot of that sometimes. I'm thankful that we don't see that here, but sometimes the Lord tries a church by using someone like that, and it could happen. But we see, even with the recent, the last few years, we've seen some church shootings. Those people weren't shot at because of what the preacher was preaching. You look at you look deeper into that, and it's not because of what the man was preaching. That person that did it was just either after somebody that was there in the congregation on a personal level, or sometimes they were just driving by and randomly. Now, we know the Lord doesn't do things randomly, but it looks as though it was just randomly. They just stopped and, here's a group of people. I'm going to go in here and shoot up the place. Sometimes they have a motive for it, and sometimes they don't. The Lord does. We know that. He did it for a reason. But anyway, so let's start reading in verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Hear ye the words of this covenant, and speak unto the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Let's stop there for a moment and talk about this covenant. What is this covenant that he's talking about? It's the covenant, and he goes into more detail here in a few minutes. But this covenant is the covenant that God made with his people, the people of Israel. It's what you go back to further back in the Old Testament to the law. It's what he promised the people if they would follow his commandments. The Lord made promises to them, but they had to follow his commandments for those promises to come true. And it's the same way with us today. If we, as his people, he has a covenant with us. And now it's not the same type of covenant that he had with them. He promised them a land in their day. The things we're promised are yet to be. We won't see them in our lifetime. But we are promised salvation. Of course, our salvation is not based on following his commandments. It is in a way, because one of his commandments is to believe on him. And if we don't do that, follow that commandment, that's a pretty good sign that we're not saved. But we're not. I'm not trying to preach a works salvation here. We're not saved on our works. But in their day, their covenant was based on the law of Moses. It was God telling them that if they would follow those commandments, that He would give them the promise of the land that He had promised them, the promised land. And let's read on it, because He goes into more detail in that. And say thou unto them, Thus saith the Lord of Israel, Cursed be the man that obeyeth not the words of this covenant, which I commanded your fathers in the day that I brought them forth out of the land of Egypt from the iron furnace, saying, Obey my voice, and do them according to all which I command you. So shall ye be my people, and I will be your God, that I may perform the oath which I have sworn unto my fathers, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, as it is this day. Then answered I and said, So be it, O Lord. So the Lord tells Jeremiah, He gives him a little history lesson here. This is what my command is, my commandment is, my covenant is with the people. He says, I told it to their fathers that came out of Egypt. When I brought them out of Egypt, I laid it out for them. I laid out the covenant for them. I told them what the requirements were, if you will, for the covenant, what they had to do to obey the covenant. All they had to do was follow the Lord. Part of the covenant we have today, and if you want to talk, I guess an easy way to explain would be like as far as being part of the bride of Christ. We're required to follow certain commandments to meet that qualification, and to reap benefit from that promise of being part of the bride. We have to follow His commandments. The main commandment of that, or main part of that is that we become a member of one of the Lord's true churches. And not just being a member, but following the Lord as a member of one of His churches. And there's untold promises that were given for that. With Israel, He promised them the land flowing with milk and honey. He says, as it is this day. Even in Jeremiah's day, the land of Israel was flowing with milk and honey. That's going to end, though, very soon in this story, because the Lord is going to send the army of the north, as He calls it, the army of Babylon. They're going to come and they're going to destroy the land of milk and honey to where there is no more milk and honey. The promises that God promised them, God's not going to be the one to break them. Understand that. It's going to be the people. They are the ones who have broken the covenant. Remember, they're the ones who have chased after false gods. And we'll get into that more later tonight too. Then the Lord said unto me, Proclaim all these words in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, saying, Hear ye the words of this covenant, and do them. For I earnestly protested unto your fathers in the day that I brought them up out of the land of Egypt, even unto this day, rising early and protesting, saying, Obey my voice. Yet they obeyed not, nor inclined their ear, but walked every one in the imagination of their evil heart. Therefore I will bring upon them all the words of this covenant, which I commanded them to do, but they did them not. You notice the Lord, he says He protested. In other words, he complained to the people. I've told you what to do. Why aren't you doing it? Why can't you follow what I told you? And we've talked about this before. If we're God's children, if we're truly His, following His commandments is a lot easier than going against His commandments. Living in this world, it doesn't always seem that way, but you look at the consequences afterwards. And yes, it is much easier and much better on us to follow his commandments than it is not to. And these people in Judah and Jerusalem are going to see that. They don't believe it yet, but they will. And the Lord said unto me, a conspiracy is found among the men of Judah and among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They are turned back to the iniquities of their forefathers, which refused to hear my words, and they went after other gods to serve them. The house of Israel and the house of Judah have broken my covenant which I made with their fathers. Their forefathers, remember when they came out of Egypt, the very first thing they did when they thought Moses was dead on the mountain, and he was only there, he was there talking with God. He took longer than they wanted him to. They had a golden calf built so they could worship it. It was something they had learned in Egypt. And he tells here, they turned back to the iniquities of their forefathers. This is not the only time we've seen this. This is not the only time. This is not the last time we'll see this in this book. We've seen it even in our Sunday school lessons in the study of the Kings. It's mentioned even that these this falling away, if you will, of the people goes all the way back to their forefathers. This is nothing new. It's just gotten worse. Is the problem, and God has finally gotten tired of it. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape. And though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. He's not going to hear their prayer. And you notice he says, I will bring evil upon them. Not somebody else. This is not the king of Babylon doing this. The Lord is going to send Babylon there himself. God is he's going to be the one to cause this to happen. And it's because it's because they broke the covenant with the Lord. Then shall the cities of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem go and cry unto the gods unto whom they offer incense, but they shall not save them at all in the time of their trouble. They're going to give up on God. When God doesn't hear them, they're going to give up and they're going to go to their false gods. And they're going to ask them, beg them, and plead with them to save them, and it's not going to work. For according to the number of thy cities were thy gods, O Judah, and according to the number of the streets of Jerusalem have you set up altars to that shameful thing, even altars to burn incense unto Baal. There's altars and places of worship for false gods in every city, and in Jerusalem on every street. We see it today. Same thing. Particularly around holiday time. Every street's decorated, just about. This is even altars to burn incense unto Baal. Baal, I want to do a study sometime on Baal. We'll see what the Lord leads in that, but it's kind of my understanding that Baal is directly tied to Satan. So we'll do Lord willing, we'll do a study on that sometime, but not tonight. But therefore pray not thou for this people, neither lift up a cry or prayer for them, for I will not hear them in the time that they cry unto me for their trouble. The Lord tells Jeremiah, don't even pray for them. It's too late. Don't even pray for them. And it's not going to do any good for them to pray either because it's too late. What hath my beloved to do in mine house? Now, we are seeing, the Lord mentions my beloved. Who's he talking about? Israel, his wife. Remember a few chapters back where he talked about writing a letter of divorcement to Israel? This is what the Lord's talking about here. He thinks of Israel as his wife. That's the relationship the Lord had with Israel. What hath my beloved to do in mine house? She's done these things in his own house, in the temple, in other words. Seeing she hath wrought lewdness with many, and the holy flesh is passed from thee. When thou doest evil, then thou rejoicest. In other words, when she has brought evil, false worship, spiritual adultery into the Lord's house, into the temple. They were, and there'll be more detail on this in further chapters, but they were worshiping Baal on the altars of God. In the temple, in the high places that we've talked about in Sunday school, in the synagogues, the worship of Baal and of other false gods was taking place on the altars that were meant to be offered to God. And he says, and the holy flesh is passed from thee. They've lost their righteousness. They're no longer considered a holy people according to God. When thou dost evil, then thou rejoicest. In other words, they're happiest and when they're doing evil. That's when they're rejoicing. That's when they're happy. That's when they're partying, living it up, all because of their evil. The Lord called thy name a green olive tree, fair. Remember, Israel is referred to an olive tree, and the Gentiles are grafted in. A green olive tree, fair and of goodly fruit, with the noise of a great tumult. He hath kindled fire upon it, and the branches of it are broken. He's broken the branches, and he's gonna burn it. For the Lord of hosts that planted thee hath pronounced evil against thee, for the evil of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah, which they have done against themselves, to provoke me to anger in offering incense unto Baal. Not only have they done this to God, they've done it to themselves. And he says, the Lord of hosts that planted thee, the one who, remember the Lord, it's the Lord who planted them in the promised land. He's the one that put them there. He's going to pronounce evil against them. He's going to bring this curse upon them because of their evil, because of their abominations that they've done. And the Lord hath given me knowledge of it, and I know it. Then thou showest me their doings. It seems as though at times when Jeremiah is talking to himself, because he grew up there, because he's been there all his life, he didn't even notice some of it. It's like with us when there's sin all around us, and we're seeing it every day, and there's certain things that we become immune to. Even though it's sin, we may laugh it off as being silly or funny. We're not doing it ourselves, but we see others doing it, type of thing. And that's what Jeremiah is seeing here. He's seen all this stuff, but he really hadn't paid much attention till the Lord brought it to his attention. And the Lord's told him, look, this is what's going on. And Jeremiah is like, okay, I see it now. He says, then thou showest me their doings. The Lord showed it to him. But I was like a lamb or an ox that is brought to the slaughter, and I knew not that they had devised devices against me, saying, let us destroy the tree with the fruit thereof, and let us cut him off from the land of the living, that his name may be no more remembered. They're talking about the Lord here. They're going to destroy his memory. They're going to, or that's their plan. That's not what's going to happen. But their plan. They want to remove God from everything in their life, because in their eyes, he's the one that's done them wrong. He's not answered their prayers anymore. But it's because they have left him. He didn't leave them. Verse 20, but O Lord of hosts, that judgest righteously, that triest the reins and the heart, let me see thy vengeance on them, for unto thee have I revealed my cause. Jeremiah's wanting to see God's vengeance on the people. And he goes back and forth. Now he's wanting to see the vengeance of God on them now, but then we'll see later in this same sermon, in another chapter, we'll see Jeremiah weeps for the people. He laments for the people. He goes back and forth. He knows they're doing wrong. He knows they need to be punished, but he's also dreading it because it's going to be so harsh. And they've gone against the Lord in everything in their life. Everything in their society is gone against the Lord. Verse 21, therefore thus saith the Lord of the men of Anathoth that seek thy life, saying, prophesy not in the name of the Lord, that thou die not by our hand. They're threatening to kill Jeremiah because of what he's preaching. What's he doing? He's preaching what God gives him. He's preaching the truth and what God gives him, and they're wanting to kill him for it. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I will punish them. The young men shall die by the sword, their sons and their daughters shall die by famine, and there shall be no remnant of them. For I will bring evil upon the men of Anathoth, even the year of their visitation. These people from the city of Anathoth they're going to suffer a horrible death. You notice it says their sons and their daughters. He says the young men shall die by the sword, their sons and their daughters shall die by famine. We'll see more of this later too in the book as we get to it. But as the army of the north comes and besieges Jerusalem, there's going to be a great famine. And it's not just Jerusalem, but it's every city that they besiege several cities. And it's just that Jerusalem is the longest of the sieges. The others are really there's not much to it, but it does happen. But in a siege, that's one of the things that happens is famine. They run out of food. And in their day, and we'll see this later, they didn't realize how bad it was going to be. They didn't know how bad it was going to be. They weren't listening to Jeremiah. They weren't listening to the Lord. They were partying it up for a time, and probably my guess would be that they probably went through their food stores a lot quicker than they should have. They didn't ration them like they should have in the beginning, and so they ran out of food, and there was a famine in the city, and people died because of the famine. When you have a famine, normally the first ones to die are the young and the old. Those in between, the middle-aged people, are hardier and able to live through a little longer than the others. But the very young and the very old are the ones who suffer first. There are other horrible things that go on in Jerusalem when the city is under siege, and we'll get to that a little later. We'll stop there for tonight. Study these things that we're reading in Jeremiah, and in particular this chapter we just read. A lot of this looks very similar to what we're seeing today. A lot of it, it's just, we know that the Lord is speaking to them in particular, but we see the things that they're doing, we're seeing done today, even by God's people today. So we need to watch. We need to pray. We need to remind ourselves who we are and who we serve. So we'll stop there for now.